Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the forum. My name is Anya Sitharam, and I'm really pleased to be the moderator of this very important event, Mitigating Climate Disasters, Scaling Up Resilience and Anticipatory Action. And I'll quickly go through some housekeeping points before we carry on, so it'll help you get the most out of this session. So if you could bring the slides up, there's a Wi-Fi connection, that's the password. You can join the conversation, not just on Slido, but on Twitter, so please do share your thoughts far and wide. We've also got interpretation in English, French, and Spanish, so thank you to the interpreters. Yep, that's the most important one. Please put your mobile phone on silent. And Slido. And we're going to be using Slido during this session very shortly, actually. So please go to Slido, EHF 2023, because we'll be using Slido to collect questions from people who are watching online, but also to gauge your opinion. So let me just frame this discussion for you and what we're hoping to get out of it. So in the report, Climate Change 2022, Impacts, Adaptation and Vulnerability, the IPCC emphasizes that climate change not only disproportionately affects already vulnerable people and systems, it's also contributing to humanitarian crisis where climate hazards interact with high vulnerability. So what should and what can be done to build long-term resilience? And this is just one of the topics our panelists will be discussing in the next hour. And so before I introduce them, I'm just going to get your thoughts. So as I said, go to slido.com, EHF 2023. And if you could answer the word cloud, so a word cloud in one word, what is needed to help communities build resilience? And while you're doing that, I will introduce our speakers. So speakers, please wave or smile when I say your name so everyone knows who you are. So first of all, Maciej Popowski, Director General, DG ECHO, European Commission. Welcome to you. Dijke Potso, DG for Crisis Prevention, Stabilization, Peacebuilding and Humanitarian Assistance from the German Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you for coming. Hong Patterson from the Green Climate Fund, Chief Financial Officer and Chief Operating Officer. Xavier Castellanos from the IFRC, welcome. And also Mashreja Andage, Founder and Executive Director, Action for Integrated Sustainable Development Association. Thank you very much. So let's take a look at the word cloud. And yes, it's not that surprising that the common word that everyone has chosen is resources and also knowledge. But then I see the word long-term there, listening, which of course is extremely important, engagement. Data is there. Often hear about data, especially in very remote places and the difficulty of accessing that kind of information. Community-led planning. So perhaps our speakers might want to allude to some of these locally led solutions. So incredibly important there. Local, community, new solutions. So thank you very much. We're going to move on now. And you might all be aware that before this forum started, there have been a number of engagement sessions around the world. And there was one on this very topic, and there was sort of regional warm-up sessions where experts and humanitarians and members of the international community brainstormed on some of the ideas and solutions to crack this very difficult nut. So I'd like to ask David Zappa, who's the DG ECHO Disaster Preparedness Technical Expert based in Bangkok, who's here for the forum, to present some of the conclusions of the DG ECHO Regional Asia consultation. David, please come to the floor.
Good morning to everyone, and I would like to thank ICVA, the International Council of Voluntary Agencies, and UN OCHA, who supported DG ECHO with the organization of this consultation in Bangkok as part of the 2022 Regional Humanitarian Partnership Week. So when it comes to factoring in the consequences of climate change in humanitarian action in Asia Pacific, we need to consider challenges and opportunities posed by the increasingly complex risk landscape. As such, this presents an unequivocal, powerful message. Climate change and environmental degradation are adding to humanitarian needs. We must collectively invest more to prepare for and to act early to mitigate future crises. The consultation identified 7 key conclusions which were proposed for further reflection and discussion here at the EHF. Firstly, the changing risk landscape calls for an integrated approach centered on overlapping and cascading risk drivers, as well as their impact on the vulnerabilities faced by communities. As such, investing in comprehensive risk analysis and in building the evidence base should be driven locally and more systematically incorporated into the humanitarian program cycle. Secondly, it is important to promote the centering of community in climate response at all stages, from risk analysis to program design and implementation. And in this domain, the youth represents an essential demographic to engage with. Thirdly, balancing financing on climate action and better coherence and connectivity of financing is needed. This is about greater coherence on climate, disaster risk, and humanitarian financing mechanism. How do humanitarian agencies and donors engage with the loss and damage discourse? Calls for further codification. Strengthening investment in understanding displacement and integrating it into climate adaptation and disaster risk management plans was the 4th conclusion. As a 5th conclusion, the urgent need to invest in greening humanitarian operations by operationalizing both DG ECHO's minimal environmental requirements and the Climate Environmental Charter for Humanitarian Actors was a right add. Improving connections between development, peace, and humanitarian communities of practice, for example, by actively contributing to the Sendai Framework midterm review, was the 6th recommendation. The final 7th conclusion was about the imperative need to document and amplify existing good practices by continuing the facilitation of experience sharing platforms like the one that we are having today. On that note, let me thank you for your attention and remind everyone that the conclusions of the discussion in Bangkok are available online. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Very succinct and in your 3 minutes that you were allotted, so I really appreciate that. So we can move on now to the discussion, and I just want to bring in a couple of our people that are on the ground that see the local challenges. And first of all, Masresha and Darge, thank you very much for joining us. I wanted to get your perspective, and could you tell us something of the key challenges that communities face daily and with the most vulnerable and the effects of climate change?
Thank you very much, Anya, and good morning, everyone. And I would like to thank those who have invited me to come and speak on behalf of the communities that we serve, and as a representative for a local NGO operating in the rural parts of Ethiopia, especially for pastoralist communities on the ground. Drought, as you all know, one of the consequences of climate change is a common thing for pastoralist communities. It's not new for pastoralist people, but what makes it unique during these times is the frequency, the severity, and length of drought that people experiencing. So what's happening because of this lengthy and severe and frequent droughts happening? Number one is conflicts are increasing from time to time. People are suffering because of the loss of water they have, because of failures of rains. And people have to move to look for water and animal feed to neighboring highland areas where they are relatively better. And during these times, conflicts are inevitable. And there are lots of casualties, more than ever this time. Even within the same pastoralist communities, among different ethnic groups, these tensions are increasing and people are dying because of conflicts, because they cannot feed their animals, they cannot feed their families, and they don't have water, and they have to move for solutions. The second one is food insecurity, which is related to loss of their livestock. The main asset of pastoralist people is their herds, their animals, their livestock. And their communal asset is their land, where they use it as a grazing land for their livestock. So in severe conditions, when they lose their livestock, they have to move to other areas because they lose these livestock, and there is no milk as a result. They cannot get meat as a result, and they cannot have market as a result. So in the current situation, for example, in the southern part of Ethiopia, in Oromia region, Borana, there is a report from OCHA and different organizations operating in the area that almost at about 3 million livestock have been dead, and most pastoralist people have become zero in terms of having their assets. So this is a big consequence of climate change. And the other related challenge is outbreak, disease outbreak, because there is scarcity in water, hygiene and sanitation gets down, and people cannot have not only drinking water for washing and everything and for their animals. So this increases the problem into bringing outbreaks like cholera within the community. So these are some of the biggest challenges that people are suffering from.
It's extremely worrying and sort of a desperate situation that climate change is exacerbating and actually causing conflict. To hear it spelled out like that, with people fighting over loss of water, loss of pasture, and having to move to new areas, also food insecurity, obviously, and disease outbreaks. What would you like to see the international community do, and what are you doing locally to try and alleviate this?
We have been working both in development programs, long-term development programs, and humanitarian response side by side. In relation to development programs, which are resilience building and anticipatory actions, we have been working with our German partners, Wildhungerhilfe, GIZ, and currently with BMZ through Wildhungerhilfe. We have water programs, water development programs, changing the existing boreholes on the ground into solarized programs so that people can get sustainable water supply, to reduce their migration, to reduce their suffering from food security, because they are also doing some small-scale irrigations using this solar program. So this is one area. The second one is we are introducing and working on natural resource programs on the ground so that people can get better grazing land for the communities during the rainy seasons. And third one, we are trying to introduce market access to the communities because one of the problems with pastoralist people is they sell their livestock for cheap because there is no much market coming to them. So we are trying to bring their livestock and have a space for them to have good market because the demand is usually from highland areas, so that people benefit from this, and so that they use it to buy some other food types coming from highland areas, and local capacity building for within the communities.
Thank you. We'll come back to you later. Thank you very much for your comments there. I'll bring another voice from the front line there in now, and that's Xavier Castellanos. Thank you very much. I'd like to hear your views on the main challenges communities are facing.
Thank you very much, first of all, for the question. But allow me to build on Maresha's comments. And allow me to zoom in a little bit for a second. And I would like in that zoom in that we all can picture. This is Fatima. She's 6 months old, and she's severe malnourished. Fatima, as million others, children under 1 year, are in severe malnourishment. Teka is her mother, has 3 more children to take care of. And she has to decide how much food it can be distributed in a context of food insecurity. And the first thing that I want to highlight here is that when we talk about hunger, it is the most undignified suffering of humanity. And in cases of contexts where there is compounded crisis and disasters, climate change adds a tremendous level of pressure in people. Ibrahim is 72 years, and he's from Pakistan. He's from the Sindh province, where floods took over and affected in 3 other provinces over 33 million people with the floods. He lost his livelihood, he lost his house, his 5 goats that were helping him in the day-to-day life. And now he's sitting at 72 years old, waiting in the line to receive humanitarian services, and thinking himself, how I'm going to take care of the 18 members of his family. In Central America, people was and is on the move every single day. When hurricanes Iota and Eta were approaching, those people in the move had no idea that 2 hurricanes were going to hit them. And people from the communities were the first one to alert and to try to find solutions to serve them. And when we look this, what we are looking, when we talk about climate-related emergencies, 83% of those are weather-related, and they are affecting over 1.7 billion people. This is twice the entire Europe, the number of people that can be affected. When I mention about Pakistan, 33 million people, is at least 5 countries from Europe that have lost everything, absolutely everything. And yesterday we hear about that the gap on the humanitarian capacity to have the conditions to reach to people in need is very low. And this is something that we are facing every single day when we are talking, and I think it's crucially that we talk about people with names, with the reality in the field. We have the tendency to talk about people that is vulnerable. People has capacities. We have to build in the capacities of the people. We have to build in the resilience that we can build from individuals, from the family level to the community level in terms of what it can be done differently. So in that zoom in that I wanted to share with all of you, there is also important to highlight a few elements that is important to bear in mind. When we talk about climate adaptation, that many organizations we are trying to do and support, less than $1 reached to the top 30 countries that are highly vulnerable to climate-related crisis. Less than $1 reach to the affected community. When we talk about greater financing that is needed, it is needed on preparedness and adaptation. But when we look into the preparedness side, less than 5% of the money goes for preparedness. And less than 10% of the money goes to adaptation, reaching to the local level. So many times we talk about the crucial role of community resilience, the crucial role of building from the bottom up, the crucial engagement between community wisdom with the wisdom that comes from the scientific knowledge and with the capacity from different actors, government authorities and international organizations. But we need to connect more that. That local wisdom also has a lot of solutions that can be offered. So I will stop there, because I have more things to share, but I will just stay in that zoom-in for the moment.
And we'll bring those in later, and the local wisdom being a very important point, and actually the fact that you said that we should actually name the people who are affected. And as a journalist and as a filmmaker, that's how I always do my reports. I always start with a case study and with a human at the center, front and center, because then everyone can relate. It's not just huge figures and statistics, which are there and very frightening, but somehow if you can zoom in and see that person, you can relate to them as another human being. Just before we continue, I have a note here to just remind everyone here of some of the conclusions of another warm-up session, and this was one that was held by the Egmont Royal Institute for Humanitarian Affairs and DG ECHO, and their recommendations to mobilize climate finance, use it more effectively, and they also came up with the idea that EU and member states should adopt a political mandate to implement the humanitarian peace development nexus, and that development and humanitarian donors should work hand in hand, supported by appropriate governance structures and strengthen coordination between donors to make sure that humanitarian funding is in line with the long-term development interventions. And the people who came up with those conclusions were workshops involving the federal government of Somalia, building resilient communities in Somalia, the Red Cross and Red Crescent Climate Center, the FAO, and another 160 online participants and an expert round table. So again, a lot of work there, and these were the main conclusions, which perhaps we can discuss in the next part of our discussion. But before we go to that, we're going to go to another Slido poll. So please go to your Slido, EHF 2023. And the question is, what is the biggest barrier to international support to address climate change shocks? So if you can see that on your Slido, the options are, and only please choose one option because you may want to tick all of them, but just choose the one that you think is the most pertinent. A, lack of funding. B, funding arrives too late. C, funding concentrated in the wrong places. D, lack of coherence between humanitarian development and climate funding. So let's just give it a second to settle down, but I can see that most of you have voted for the lack of coherence between humanitarian development and climate funding. So that's, again, another knotty problem that needs to be sorted out. Okay, thank you very much for that. More than 70% of you have chosen that. Right, I'm going to bring in Dijke Potzel now. Thank you so much for being here. And we've heard quite a lot, and we've seen the answer there about lack of coherence. There's a question here for you. How can humanitarian development and climate actors work together to respond to these current and really very frightening future climate shocks?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think, and thank you all for your answers there. I think you really hit the nail on the head there. I think we have to get much better in coordinating our approaches. And I think what we heard here from the ground also shows already that this interlinkage, and it's not only referring to the funding bit of it, but like really this cooperation we were talking about Nexus yesterday already is really, really important. And it is also important to kind of differentiate the instruments. And we feel that anticipatory action, and we mentioned it before, is really one of the key instruments for humanitarian actors to deal with climate-induced crises. If you talk like longer term developments, that would really, for us and our understanding, be up to the development actors to get engaged. And then we have to work like closely together, as I said. And if you allow me, I would like shed a little bit of light on our understanding of anticipatory action, because I realized recently at the Riyadh International Humanitarian Forum that there is still a lot of confusion of what that actually is. And to us, I have to say, it is really sort of a more short-term humanitarian instrument where we go in based on data when a trigger is going off, like shortly before a flood is coming or a storm is coming or a harsh winter is coming. And then based on the data, and experts tell us that between 20 and some say 50% of natural disasters can actually be predicted. So to us, it makes a lot of sense then, based on the data, to go in early and then to find the right instruments to work against the disaster striking and creating a lot of, well, either losing lives or a lot of other catastrophes. So what we also feel, and that is very important to us, and we were talking about the funding gap, we feel that we save a lot of money by going in early and preventing people from losing their livelihoods. Let me just give one example that we keep repeating, the FAO took 230 million euros to intervene before a locust plague hit in Africa. And they estimated that if they had not gone in with those 230 million before the plague actually hit, they would have needed to spend 1.7 billion euros to then counter the after effects. So if we want to save money, and as we know the funding gap is there, and money is not getting more, so if we want to save money, this is to us a perfect way of doing this, and that's why we invite everybody to join in and spend more on anticipatory action, just naming the anticipation hub here. So do go online and check out what they can do to support you in this. We are happy to also share our experience with you. So let's, we feel that this is really one of the instruments to make the humanitarian system more efficient and more effective, and that is why we are going to spend at least 5% of our humanitarian budget this year on anticipatory action, and that is about 130 million euros this year.
Thank you very much. That's a really good example there, really clarifying what you can do in the short term on the basis of an early warning. I'm a little bit confused though, because what's the difference between anticipatory action and preparedness, which has been going on for a very long time? How would you describe that?
Well, preparedness really for us is sort of the responsibility of the development actors, and they should go in much earlier, and that is much more about capacity building resilience in the long term, and that is different from anticipatory action, which really goes in if you know that a storm is coming. And like in sort of the developed world, I mean, when we hear, like back home in Berlin, when I hear that a storm is coming, obviously I bring in the stuff from outside, and I don't know, I park the car in the car park and so on and so forth. So we do things that, you know, seem natural to us. But in other regions, people do not have the opportunity to do that. So we need to help them. We need to help them like one other example, harsh winter in Mongolia was about to hit. So people received money to buy fodder for the animals up front so that they were able to feed the animals during the winter time so that they didn't have to provide for them then otherwise. And so they were able to keep their livestock. So that is really short-term intervention, anticipatory action. But like if you talk preparedness, really we need other actors, and that to us is really up to our development colleagues. And again, that's something why we need to work more closely together.
Thank you very much. It seems a very neat short-term solution. Throw the money at the problem before it hits. And yeah, maybe you can get a good outcome. Thank you very much. Let's talk about finance. We've heard quite a bit about climate finance already. So Hong Patterson at the end there, I can just about see you at the other end. Thank you very much for joining us. So tell us about the role of development banks and the Green Climate Fund, and also perhaps you'd like to answer some of the assertions by the other speakers, particularly Xavier, about the money not reaching the 30 most vulnerable places where climate financing isn't actually getting to the people who need it most.
Sure, thank you, and thank you for having me. I think that it's a wonderful opportunity to actually bring in the climate financiers alongside the humanitarian work, and I do have to applaud the humanitarian workers on the ground. It's an incredible job that you do, and it's just stunning for us. And so I guess maybe if I step back a little bit in terms of thinking about this whole issue around sufficient financing. The first thing I will say is that, the Green Climate Fund was established as the financing mechanism under the Paris Agreement. And under the Paris Agreement, if you recall, there's a call for $100 billion of funding per annum. And that problem is exacerbated to the trillions. The Green Climate Fund, at our last replenishment, was $10 billion of that $100 billion. And governments around the world have not met that $100 billion. And so starting with that point in terms of availability and what's out there for climate financing, it's still not at the level it needs to be. So we're working with very, very limited resources as a general theme across this spectrum. Then if I move to some of the issues that we see, and I think, we talk about that insufficient financing, when there's a climate action, when there's a climate impact, what happens generally is that the countries are bankrupt, right? And so that's where there's lack of availability. And I mean, that's one of the many reasons for lack of availability. But so I'll give Dominica as an example. And when we look at debt to GDP, normally in a healthy economy, it's about 60% debt to GDP. Dominica had about 50% debt to GDP in the 90s. A hurricane hit, and their debt to GDP went off the charts, over 100%. And so when you're looking at a country like that, and you're asking them to then put in adaptation or climate resiliency in their recovery, when their debt to GDP is in excess of 100%, how are they going to do this? And long term, as we've all heard, putting in climate resiliency into their planning is long term better, and long-term more cost-effective, and economically makes all the sense in the world. There's nothing that can dispute that. But that capital injection, that capital expenditure that occurs at the beginning is the hurdle that countries really struggle overcoming. So Dominica spent 15 years putting in austerity measures to finally get back to at about the 60% level. 15 years in austerity measures. That means that everyone in that country is suffering. What happened next? Another hurricane. They literally just recovered, and another hurricane, and overnight their debt to GDP went over to 200%. And you can imagine, I mean, you know, in times of war, debt to GDP goes down about 20%. In 12 hours, it went to 200%. I mean, that is incredible. So you're looking at countries that are just in this vicious cycle. And so when we think about the work that we do, you know, the early warning systems, and I can talk about the work that we do there, approximately a third of our portfolio is aligned to supporting early warning systems, and the call from the UN Secretary General for early warning for all, we are very much involved in that and to do more. But if I think about that cycle in terms of how do we rethink humanitarian assistance, especially for internal displacement? How do we, you know, how can we contribute there to provide money very quickly? And we are not a humanitarian assistance organization, we're a climate fund. But how do we participate in that? And so the work that we do really helps support expanding parametric insurance, for example. And that's where, you know, a trigger hits and then that money can flow immediately. You're not waiting for that money in terms of countries negotiating for that money. We had a project with a private investment fund where they actually provided microloans during the period of COVID recovery. And that's another way where we provide that concessionality. We ended up providing first loss, and that really helped the private sector to come in and say, you know, I think we can take profit on this. And the GCF is demonstrating to the market that there is ability to redistribute that risk, where we took on that risk of that long duration of recovery, knowing that over time, these companies, these local companies and local players can actually help recover. We're working on looking at how do we use debt swaps to help reduce that debt burden for the countries, and that debt for climate swap in order to then, during this period of lapse of where there's humanitarian money comes in, and private sector coming in, and that could be a 3-year, 5-year time horizon, and there's just no money. And so how do we then help support countries to reduce their debt burden and reuse that money for climate resilient projects? And then how do we support the private sector to come in? And this is where we've actually invested in a guarantee company to help these small local companies to take guarantees from this company. They are able to break the credit rating of their home country, which is at this point at the equivalent of junk bond status, because they're still recovering from this climatic event, and so they're able to break that credit rating ceiling and be able to access affordable borrowing rates so that they can continue their business. We also provide those guarantees for companies to actually come back into these countries, knowing that we're taking the risk on this. So I know that, you know, the stories are not as interesting as the humanitarian stories, but this is actually, from a financial perspective, you know, that money, as terrible as it is, it's just so incredibly critical to bring in.
Thank you. It's great to hear about the sort of innovative ways you're working, and that you're working with the private sector locally as well to try and crack this problem. We'll come back to that. Actually, you put your microphone down. I just wanted to ask you one brief question, really, about the risk, because some of the countries that we're talking about are some of the most fragile in the world, and these events happening, I wondered how much, you know, do you have to be less risk averse? I'm just wondering how you view risk.
Yeah. So we're, our executive director always says that we are risk-patient capital. And so if I just break that down, what that actually means is that we will take out concessionality or provide financing for as long as 40 years. And if you think about some of these recovery times, that's, access to financing for a long duration. Normally what happens is that you'll go in and you'll say, I need a loan. And then they'll say, okay, fine, I'll give you a loan, but you're really, really, really risky, so I'll give it to you for 6 months, 12 months at maximum. And some of these programs, especially even if you think about COVID, how do you endure 12 months? And that's it, right? And so having access to long-term financing is really important. Having access to affordable financing is really important. And then that risk patient is where we actually are the ones who are taking the risk. We're the ones who come in and say, listen, we will take the first loss. That means that you invest in this country, and if anything happens, the first ones to lose their shirts is the GCF. And that really triggers the private sector to think, well, if I have nothing to lose, the GCF is going to take that loss, so I should be going in. And that's where you can really shorten that horizon of where the humanitarian assistance comes in and private sector comes back in. Now, the other players, so the MDBs and the other IFIs, I think that there is an opportunity for coherence and complementarity. And so some of the work that we do actually, from an infrastructure perspective, a lot of these development banks will come in, but they do need that security of, and this is the importance of these development banks, is that they're there in the long term. They do have a credit rating to protect, and so that can be oftentimes expensive. And so we work with a lot of these development banks to actually reduce that borrowing cost for countries. So they're actually leveraging our concessionality to help come in. And so that's where, we can continue to encourage that risk-taking behavior.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is a very wide-ranging conversation. I think quite unusual, really, in this kind of forum to have a climate finance expert contributing as well. So thank you so much. I forgot to mention at the very beginning that we have a very talented graphic artist with us who's honing down our discussions, and thank you so much, Alex, on the screen, capturing some of the things that we're saying. In fact, doing my job for me rather well, so I'll just come back to that at the end and we can use it in the sum up. Thank you very much. And so I'd like to bring in Maciej Propovski now. Thank you so much. What do you think that DG ECHO should be doing in all of this? What are the steps and what's needed to crack this difficult nut?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Look, I'll start on a personal note and I'll end on one as well. And I'm new to the job, 3 weeks tomorrow, and when I started, I found out that the induction training comes in a package with the cyclone, because that was exactly the time when Cyclone Freddy hit, and of course it hit the already vulnerable communities in Madagascar, Mozambique, Malawi. So it was a bit of a crash course for me. But indeed, this preparedness is the very essence of our work. I mean, Taika eloquently explained the difference between anticipatory action and preparedness. I don't need to go there. But indeed, we help communities prepare for climate-related shocks. We have a dedicated budget of 78 million euros for disaster preparedness. And I can give you an example of what we have done in Bangladesh. Bangladesh was mentioned by Javier. There, we've been funding a project to support communities to take forecast-based action to protect people's lives with view to monsoon flooding. So in 2021, I mean the monsoon season 2021, temporary community shelters were put in place for about 500 individuals, and then 1,000 people were evacuated by boat. So it is something very practical, very proactive, accompanied by in-kind and cash assistance if needed. So that gives people a dignified way as well to survive the crisis. The other personal reflection takes me back some time. You know, first time I discovered DG ECHO was actually in July 1997. I was a young diplomat back then. I was young once. And there was a time when my home city of Wrocław in Poland was hit by a severe flood. A flood of the century, as it were. And Netflix made a series about it a few months ago. It was a shocking experience. You know, it's a great city, but it has 5 major rivers and 100 bridges, and it was completely flooded. So I was sent to ECHO to talk about technical assistance. It worked wonderfully well, but then going back time and again, I saw how much investment was made because people drew the right lessons. One of the reasons why the flood hit so severely was that the dikes that were there were 12 centimeters too low. They were built by the Germans in 1912. And now, with all the huge investment that came in later, the city is safe. Floods happen every year in the Czech Republic, in Poland, in Germany, but the city is safe. So that was, in a way, my formative experience. Now I've come a full cycle and became DG of ECHO, but this experience will certainly guide me in our work on preparedness.
Thank you very much for that. So what do you know, this question that has been put and it's come up on the Slido, so how should the various actors work together better for a more coordinated response? Maciej.
Look, first of all, we need to take it seriously. In your introduction, you mentioned the IPCC report, the latest IPCC report that confirms how bad it is, and so that we have to be braced for rising temperatures and extreme weather events. I mean, it's not entirely new, but maybe the tonality this time around is a bit more dramatic. So, no, we need to take it seriously. I always take the IPCC report seriously, because when the previous one, one of the previous ones was released in 2009, that gave me an opportunity of meeting Sir Paul McCartney, because that was in the run-up to the Copenhagen summit. So we have to translate it into policy, and then from policy into projects, and that's exactly what we're doing by working on climate adaptation and resilience. And of course, we all struggle with the funding. Maybe the funding gap was ranked 4th or the 5th issue on Slido, but it's still a challenge for all of us because our budgets are stretched, and we have to make sure that we have enough margin for what we need to do, because we're also acting in our enlightened self-interest.
Thank you very much. Right, we're going to have the Q&A now. So I'd like to hear from you in the room. We've got microphones, roving microphones, which will move around. I can't see any of you, so I think our helpers with the microphones hopefully will be able to locate you. But if you want to ask a question, please stand up and raise your hand. So I'll take 2 or 3 to begin with. Does anyone want to ask a question in this? Oh, there's a lady there standing and one there. Where are our roving microphones? Do we have any? Yeah, they're on their way. Right, can you stand up again, please, at the back and raise your hand? There's the lady standing. Is that you with your back to me? Yes, thank you. There's a microphone coming to you, and there's one. All right, there's another one back there. All right, so I'll take 2 questions. Yes, the one with the microphone first. Sorry, I'm not very good at coordinate. I wouldn't be a very good conductor of an orchestra, but anyway, would you like to give your name and title and ask a question?
Good morning. My name is Carmen van Hees. I'm the Regional Emergency Advisor for UNICEF in South Asia. Thanks to all the speakers for a very fascinating and inspiring brief. I want to pick up on the issue of anticipatory action and preparedness. in order for all of us to avoid a very conceptual debate, what is preparedness, what is anticipatory action, I think it will be very interesting to also bring it back to member states, how you see how this immediate response, getting ready if something is on the way, is going to be dovetailed with longer term preparedness, investment, capacity building, etc. I think the clearer the guidance is, the clearer also different funding streams from both development and humanitarian are coming together. We'll avoid a lot of debates and will certainly accelerate action in these important areas. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And there was a lady there, she's standing and waving. If you can get a microphone to her, please, we'll take that question.
Hi, my name is Nishani. I'm with a humanitarian NGO network which works across all conflict and fragile contexts. And we had similar discussions at our annual conference on Friday, looking at, the nexus approaches. And what we heard from our local members who work with communities day in, day out, is that we don't have siloed approaches to needs, but our response is extremely siloed. It's humanitarian, preparedness, anticipatory action, development, climate. And my question to donors and, within your own organizations, how are you harmonizing your nexus approaches and funding mechanisms? I think this is key if we are to break these siloed approaches, because on the ground, it's not. The response is happening because the need is there. And I think we put communities first and see what the needs are, which is what our humanitarian mandates are meant to do. We should be able to find solution at system policy level as well. And that gap needs to be looked at in a more holistic manner.
Right, are there any more questions from the floor before I get our panelists to respond? Yes, any? Yep, okay, one more, thank you.
Yes, my question is specifically directed to the Director General of DG ECHO. The European Union, in terms of anticipatory action, and sorry, my name is Rachele Gianfranchi from Everbridge, a private company that provides public alerting to 24 countries nationwide in the world. So the European Union is the only geography in which public warning has become a regulatory obligation for the member states as a key element of their anticipatory action. And the question would be, are you considering extending, encouraging this regulatory rollout to countries that benefit of European humanitarian assistance? Because it is a very effective way to reduce and adapt to climate risk, as we are seeing in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll go straight to you, Matej, to see if you could answer that question, please. It was to you about whether you're considering rolling out that to be able to be more effective.
Right. Look, we are certainly ready to share the best experience, because ECHO's mandate is both internal and external. So we also an operator within the European Union through the civil protection mechanism. And then there is a lot of accumulated knowledge and experience. We also conduct regular lessons learned exercises, and we are ready to share it not only with our own member states, which is obvious, but with any other country. And with a number of countries, we have agreements, arrangements for them to participate in the civil protection mechanism, so they can also benefit from that knowledge. But even if they don't have a formal agreement, that can be done. So I wouldn't say that we are going to impose regulation. That's not the way it works. But if there is a body of best practices, it can certainly be exported, and we can accompany that also by either providing technical assistance or funding for necessary investment.
Thank you very much. Daika, there was a question about anticipatory action, which perhaps you might wish to try and answer. And it was really about, again, anticipatory action and preparedness. And should these be dovetailed with longer-term resilience?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's very important, and it gives me the opportunity to again underline how important this connection is, and this cooperation. And the other question was regarding like the silos that still exist. And you're so very right. We know and we hear that from the ground, that this is like on the ground is not sort of implicable, and that people work very differently on the ground, and we need that feedback, and it is absolutely crucial that on the ground people really work together. And so yes, we need this cooperation much more. We suggested during the Lake Chad conference that recently took place in Niamey, it was mentioned yesterday in the opening ceremony as well, we suggested a so-called Nexus Fund or a Nexus Facility, exactly to push actors, to push international organizations, but also push actors on the ground to cooperate more. What we see a bit critical is that like people are blurring mandates and everybody is trying to tap into funding from all different sides and to kind of do the nexus in one organization. We feel that there is so much knowledge between different actors, but we all need to cooperate better and bring in our expertise and then break the silos, as you said. And anticipatory action is one means, but it cannot stand alone, absolutely not. It is preventing humanitarian crises, or hopefully, or the worst of them at least. But we do need the others to prepare much better and much longer and bring in the development aspect much earlier on as well.
Thank you. Xavier, I think you wanted to come in. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm actually very humbled because I have DG ECHO, our largest supporter in the preparedness side, and we have the German government, which is the largest supporter of anticipatory action that we do through the Anticipation Hub. Just to mention two things. When we look into the Anticipation Hub, more than 130 members are engaged. And this includes government, includes NGOs, includes the Red Cross, Red Crescent, includes different actors. And that shows how we try to merge, how we try to avoid the silo. And I think that's a very critical role in terms of anticipatory action. When we look into the preparedness, what we look definitely is a combination with the long term. It has to be with policies, it has to be with procedures, it has to be with legal and laws and regulations that are going to help at the level of the governments. But at the level of local communities, it has to do with community organization on how it's going to work. And let me put the example of Mozambique. Mozambique was part of the anticipatory action. We worked with them ahead of the time. When the Hurricane Freddy was approaching, this means that the connection with the government authorities, the trigger was clear with the government authorities, with the local authorities, the Red Cross societies. They mobilized more than 450 volunteers already. They had pre-positioned stocks. They had pre-positioned boats. They have pre-positioned the conditions in order to mobilize and to ensure that communities are in a safe place. So the anticipatory action, it is clearly connected with what we call the early warning protocols and how is in-depth, as you mentioned, discussion based on data, and it is not only one organization, it's a combination of local authorities, national authorities, how we connect the information, and what will be the trigger that will guarantee that an anticipatory action will put it in place. And we are lucky that the Disaster Response Emergency Fund that is supported by ECHO and many other donors We have the commitment by 2025 that 25% of the disaster response emergency fund should be allocated for anticipatory action. So I'm just trying to put the two elements in terms of how the preparedness and how the anticipatory action can work together from the humanitarian eyes. But any anticipatory action without community preparedness, it won't work. It will affect communities. Therefore, there is a huge need of investment at community level.
Thank you. Masreta, I'd like to bring you in here. Do you have any thoughts from a community level point of view? Do you agree with Xavier?
Thank you. Yes. So we have had a conference on pastoralist people, specific to the context of my working area, and specifically to the areas of East Africa and Horn of Africa, where predominantly people are pastoralist communities. The two challenging problems of the communities mentioned during that conference was, one is drought, and the other one is extreme flooding. We have drought on one side, which is a problem of shortage of water, and on the other side, we have excessive water coming from the highland areas due to the heavy rain raining in the highland areas. So at the end of the conference, what all the stakeholders agreed upon, that it was an international conference, people coming from different pastoralist people in East Africa, Uganda, Kenya, Somalia, and many from Ethiopia, is how can we use this threat, this huge water coming from the highland areas, to benefit from, because we have a shortage of water, we are saying, on the other side. So the thing is, it's a lot of investment that it needs, obviously, but it's what we can do from small scale level at the beginning and expand it so that we can solve this problem permanently. So the thing is, donors and international partners can do and can contribute a lot on this through doing water conservation programs, through expanding agriculture programs, through introducing renewable energy programs like solar that we are doing and working very well on the ground, and through building the capacity of local partners and local communities for a community-led program. So these are the most important things that we can do, and donors can contribute to solve these climate-induced problems in pastoralist areas, for example.
So you're talking really about capacity building, which is a long-term capacity building there. But what about the idea of anticipatory action? Suppose there is a weather forecast going to say there is going to be a flood. How would the communities actually be able to link in with that? And how would it work for you?
Yeah, I can give a typical example for this. For the same context in pastoralist areas, for example, if we anticipate there is a drought coming, it's becoming frequent, and we know that, for example, in Afar region, it's coming every year. For local partners, we cannot make any preparation because we don't have any reserve money. If we had reserve money, we could have bought animal feed and put it in place before the drought comes, and immediately before people leave that area, we can supply that feed, and we can supply water from the nearest area, and people can sustain without becoming IDPs and relocating to other areas. That's a typical example for
That's a really good, tangible example there. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I do want to take a couple of the Slido questions. There's a couple there about funding for anticipatory action. So, Daika, would you care to answer it? I'm sure you'd say there should be more funding, but at the moment, according to the question, there's only a certain amount directed towards it. Should there be more?
we'd love to see more, and I said, like, back home, let's try to at least spend 5% this year, so happy to see more. But one has to say, it is still a rather young instrument, and we are still learning with it, and we also need, as you rightly said, Xavier, we need the expertise on the ground, we need the capacity on the ground also. So I think it is the right way, and happy to see more, but we are still, as I say, it's still the beginning. On the other hand, we also know that donors are, the donors community is in part still hesitant, because people also feel like, what is happening if the drought then is not coming? What is happening with our money? What is happening with the food stuff that we bought? So, and it's then difficult to explain for them, to their parliaments, to their taxpayers, you know, why did you spend money on X, Y, Z if then something didn't happen? Now, we feel comfortable to explain that, but others really have issues with that, and also some people are still not convinced of the instrument and of the effects. So we need to do more lobbying, and we do that together with our partners. Even like events also like this, you know, we hope that this helps to spread the good news and to make people comfortable that this works, but we also need more examples from the ground, positive examples that it did work and that we did save lives and that we did improve livelihoods.
Thank you very much. And Hong, if you can answer in 1 minute, there's a question for you there. How is GCF ensuring that resources are being channeled to the most vulnerable communities? As you can see from the countdown, we don't have very much time.
Sure.
Thank you.
So we do work with countries in terms of their country planning, and we are a partnership-based model. And I'll give, instead of talking about the GCF, I'll give the example of what we've done in the Sahel, where we've actually looked at it across the entire cycle. So we've spent about 30 projects, $1 billion, and that's attracted another $2.5 billion worth of financing into the Sahel region for the Great Green Wall projects that we've, or platforms that we've been looking at. So one example is supporting a microinsurance program to help with that parametric insurance component. Another one is where we've helped fund irrigation systems and provide access to finance to small farmers so that they can actually grow climate resilience crops.
Thank you very much. Our graphic artist has beautifully encapsulated many of the discussions, so I think we can see that there as we come to the sum up. So basically, about breaking silos, we need data, which allows reduction. Of course, we need coordinated responses, and we need to push actors on the ground to cooperate better. So thank you very much to our graphic artist. I've got about a minute left, and I'm going to take a big risk now, and I'm going to ask each of our panelists, if you can do it in 20 seconds, just one thought about what is the next step to try and alleviate these climate shocks. So in a sentence, please, what is the next step, Marisha?
What I would suggest is action, especially on the nexus approach. Let's push and work on the nexus approach. It will be a solution for climate change related issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Daika.
First of all, we still need to work on our sort of climate goals, and that has a lot to do with the policies that we pursue in our countries. And then I can just echo, nexus, 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 to cooperate, and then we can make it work.
Thank you. Xavier.
Thank you. I would say greater people-centered approach. And the second would be increase the risk appetite for anticipatory action.
Thank you very much. And then we go on to Masit.
Look, I'll come back to the nexus because we still have the silos, but we should simply realize and accept that we may be divided by our instruments, but we are united by our objectives.
Thank you. And Hong.
Thank you. So it would be incorporating that climate resiliency as part of that Building Back Better.
Thank you so much. And I think we should all leave this discussion feeling quite optimistic. It was wonderful to hear about solutions. So I'd like to thank all our panelists for taking part and for your insights and your ideas. Round of applause to our panelists.